Hey, everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave, and I'm joined here with Greg, my co host on this excursion. Greg, what's
Hmm.
up?
Not too much this week, Dave. Just you know what? I may be getting certified in ear acupuncture. So,
You
if
got
anybody that's interested,
you
let me
got that
know.
email too, I see.
Yes, I did. I did. Thinking about it.
State of Rhode Island
Uh,
is pushing for it. So,
I mean, hey, look, another little tool in our tool belt, I guess.
are you actually allowed to do that?
Yeah.
Hmm. I didn't know if our certification covered that. So, or if we would ever actually want to do that to somebody.
Yeah, so I'm gonna see that my plan is to get it done and like see what that's like, and if I see if I get anything from it. And just take it from there. Maybe research it a little bit. But I think it's a cool thing to have, right?
Yeah,
It's a cool.
maybe research it a little bit.
All right, I will. So, and that's what we do, Dave. We do research, so I don't think it should be that hard. Um, what do you think, buddy? You want to jump right back into this thing, or
Sure.
you have
Let's
anything
see
going
what it.
on?
No, let's see what we got here.
All right, so this is what we got here. This is again maybe a something that you don't want to blame on me. Normally, if it's something I picked, you want to like you're gonna blame it on me. But I like this. I like this, and I think the people are gonna enjoy it. And I have a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas that I want your take on.
Okay.
So, without further ado, we're gonna talk about Grimm's fairy tales and the importance of them. And we're not gonna do a whole history on the Grimms, but I will say a couple things. I will say that Jacob and Wilhelm,
Wilhelm.
yeah,
Jeez.
Grimm, um, two of 10 children, which is, I mean, fairly normal back in, late 1700s, I suppose. And to guide all those children's behaviors, you could imagine that the parents needed to tell a ton of stories, right? That's how you raise your kids. And sometimes, in some ways, that's still how you raise your kids. But like you have these stories that keep them out of the woods, that keep them doing certain dangerous things.
Well, if you think about it, it's like crazy because their only form of entertainment
Uh-huh.
previously for the longest time was storytelling, right?
It's a beautiful thing. It really is. And it's not just their only form of entertainment. It's like it goes deeper than that, and we'll talk about it. So Jacob, which is the oldest of the brothers, was head of the household by the time he was 11. His dad died when he was 44 years old. Um, that's that's intense, right?
Mm.
You're 11 and now you've got essentially 10 mouths to feed. So these guys had to be self-starters. They had to believe that they could create something out of nothing. And what they really found to be interesting was they had this idea that the most natural and pure form of their culture were their stories, and that was a big part of their upbringing. And at the time, Germany needed an identity. It wasn't like even when they were where they were born, it wasn't quite Germany yet. So the brothers thought that the soul of the country and its connectivity and like the identifying force would be from the stories that people told to each other, the stories that people told their children. And it makes sense to me. Like this is how you develop values. You tell your kids these stories so that they can perpetuate this culture that you want to see shine through in this country, right? It's kind of a cool thing. So they were essentially collectors, not unlike yourself, Dave. I often think of you as an American picker.
I'm like
Um,
an American Grimm.
it's pretty grim. Damn it, that's a joke I put in here. I was thinking about using it at some point,
Ah,
but burned it. What are we gonna do? In 1812, so I don't know, 1812 they published the first version of these, they called them household tales, they called them children's stories, they called them wonder tales, we call them fairy tales. But is that earlier or later than you thought, as far as like when Grimm's fairy tales were published?
no, that probably captures it about right.
Yeah, I mean it's old, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if I felt like it was much older,
Hmm.
but I guess it makes sense. These guys were linguists and they were interested in, like I said, kind of like an authentic German history. And I thought that I was, getting the idea that they think that to develop a future for Germany, this is how like sort of idealistic and ambitious they are, that they would need to have a foundation. And this oral framework that the whole German people shared, included certain, things that you'd see over and over again, like revenge and of course, happily ever after and supernatural occurrence and violence. Um, and also when you hear fairy tales, nature, and when you think about nature, like, I don't know, the forest, the trees, the animals, all end up on the side of goodness. And I like the idea that like the natural world is your ally if what you're doing is quote unquote right. So I mean that we've seen that in different ways. Like Carl Jung even talks about that a little bit, where it's in fairy tales, people listen to the strange, you know, either the birds or the trees or the wind, and that's sort of like kind of represents your subconscious in a way, or your
Well,
gut.
and also like Taoism is all about nature and kind of like not throwing off the balance of nature. So it's interesting.
Yeah, nature plays a hugely important role. And I guess that you like you kind of mentioned before, this is their only form of entertainment, telling each other stories. So people were probably way more connected with nature than they are now,
Yeah,
I
I
would
would
have to
assume.
assume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it'd be fun to get into a few of these stories. Like I'll start off with Cinderella, which is a story that we've seen over and over in many iterations. But we're talking about the Grimm version of these tales, which in the end aren't even the grimmest versions of all, but these are his
Well, and that's
yeah.
the part, if anything, more than like the date of publication, it's more of, I don't think I kind of realized how many times these stories have been told over and over, and that there was versions even prior to Grimm and following Grimm and before Disney. I didn't fully understand that. So that's an interesting
You know,
aspect of
it is so interesting, and we need to come back to that at the end because I really want to, and I don't want to now, but I really want to get your take on like the sanitization of stories and whether or not people should have, I don't know, whether or not the audience should have an influence on how a story is told or continued to be told. I think that's a really interesting thing that we can look at.
it. Okay.
But for now, I'll tell you that in the Grimm Cinderella, Cinderella's mother dies and she gets a stepmother, but the daughters, they're beautiful, which is different from what we see in Disney. There's no Gus Gus or Rucife, for those who have seen the cartoon. She plants a tree branch that's, just a branch on top of where her mother's grave is, and this beautiful tree grows. And there's birds that grant her wishes, which is probably
Hmm.
pretty useful. Her stepmother's really mean to her. That tracks. And she's really pushing for her stepdaughters, and the father's just kind of not around at all to know what's going on. That's a weird theme that we see. But she's allowed to go to this ball. The invitation goes out that there's a ball, you can meet the prince, all that. If she's able to pick peas out of the ash. And Cinderella, now that I'm hearing it, it makes sense. That's like part of her name, right? She's this like someone who gets something out of the ash.
Oh
It's kind
yeah.
of it's kind of an
I never
interesting
thought
connection
about
there.
that. Yeah.
Anyways, the yeah, right. So the birds from the tree help her, complete this task. Not unlike the Disney version where all the animals and little mice and everything help her out, Gus Gus and all. She's able to go to the ball. She does lose a slipper, which is gold. It gets caught in, the prince. She runs away from the prince, and the prince like has like the roads tarred or something like that, so that no one can really get away. And like one of her slippers gets caught in it. And the stepmother finds out what's going on. The guy's coming with the slipper, like in the regular Cinderella. And instead of just like doing this awkward, like I'm trying to shove my toes in this thing, the stepmother says, mutilate your feet, cut your toes off. One of the daughters had to cut their heel off. And she said that when you're queen, you won't have to work. So that's a part that's pretty dark. That was part of the original tale where they literally cut their toes off. And it gets a little bit darker than that because Cinderella ends up producing the other gold slipper, and the sisters, for their cruelty, have their eyes pecked out by those friendly birds from the tree. And they're blind. I mean, and so like, and then everyone lives happily ever after, right? And it's
Of
like, well,
course.
not everyone, you know? And it's so this is like you see this kind of thing where, okay, people are there's a theme, right? Like people are rewarded for kindness and punished for cruelty. It's an interesting thing.
What's the
We'll see that
stepmother's
throughout.
punishment? That she has blind daughters?
I guess so.
Because she's the one kind of like pushing them.
I know.
to do these
I know.
things. I
But
actually
listen,
just
here,
watched a film called what is it? The Ugly Stepsister. It's like I think it was a Norwegian horror film, and it's
yeah,
from one of the stepsisters' perspective instead of from Cinderella's perspective. And through the film, you see her like do all these things to get the prince's attention and things like that. And one of them is like the mother tells her to like mutilate her feet so she'll fit into the slipper, and she
really.
like eats tapeworms and stuff like that so she'll fit into a dress and does all these crazy surgeries. It's really dark and twisted, but it actually kind of falls in line more with
With
like the
the
Grimm.
original tale, like
Yeah, which is
yeah, a little bit more
interesting.
in depth, what it would really be like. So it's yeah, because I think like the fairy tales, they're by nature so short that it leaves out a lot of like the nuance that you can
Sure.
like kind of fill in with like scary stuff,
And
right?
we're always getting the perspective too of like the princess or
I
the
love that
character.
idea of like, you know, what happened? How did Ursula become the way she was? Or
Sure.
how did, you know what I mean? Like these,
Or like
the
side
darker.
characters, like the stepsisters. I mean, obviously, they're prominent characters, but still, they're kind of like the side characters versus like
Yeah.
the stepmother and Cinderella or
And
something
when
like
you're a
that.
kid watching this, you're like, I don't give a shit about what happens with the
Yeah,
stepdaughters.
they're just like throwaway characters almost.
And you know what's funny about that is something that I was going to bring up later, but it's this idea of, you know, the just world complex or the just world hypothesis, where like people think that, all right, just because I do the right things and say the right things and act the right way, that things are going to work out good for me. And that kind of makes you, and I was wondering like what the critiques were on that because it sounds like karma and it sounds fine, but it's like we're talking about, it's like, so terrible things happen to those sisters. So we just assume we have no empathy for them because it's like, well, in a just world, they must have been shitty their entire lives. So we can't feel bad for them. But in reality, it's like they only know what they know from that evil stepmother. So they're
Yeah,
kind of
because
victims too.
she was literally telling them to mutilate their toes so that
Yeah.
they can fit into a yeah. So like you think about like the pressure that's being put on them to win that affection of the
Yeah, it's
prince.
pretty
It's
dark
crazy.
actually. So I'll get into another one here real quick. And I liked this one a lot because to me it kind of rang true for like Satanic Panic or a 1980s kidnapper, a stranger danger thing. And that's Red Riding Hood. So grandma, of course, loves her very much, and mom says, "Hey, look, bring this wine and this cake for grandma." And she's like explicitly tells her, "Hey, look, don't talk to anyone. Your grandmother lives in the woods. Just, you know, straight shot." And Red Riding Hood has lived a charmed life, right? It kind of describes her of like just this beautiful person that's never run into any issues in her life. So she's like, okay, mom, whatever. So she doesn't really take that seriously. And then she encounters a wolf, and she doesn't know like the nature of a wolf. And he's kind of able to easily deceive her and tells her to go pick flowers or something like that so he can go sneak into grandma's house, eat her, dress like her, and wait for Red Riding Hood to get there. So there's a strange thing that happens there where it's like we should be like we're constantly thinking to ourselves, don't play the violent games, don't listen to the violent tales, don't watch the violent movies. But it's like if you know a little bit more about like the dangers of the world, you can be a little bit more prepared for it. And what's beautiful about these tales, it's like you can experience the dangers of the world within the safety of the tale because the tale always ends, you know, happily ever after. So and in the Grimm tale, it is, you know, what big ears you have, what big eyes you have. I was happy to see all that, right? And what happens is the wolf also eats Red Riding Hood. But in this
Wow,
one, the huntsman comes, cuts the wolf open, and you know, the grandmother and Red Riding Hood are somehow fine. They've been in the
that's
stomach.
wild.
That's wild and supernatural, and no one questions that. And then they stuff rocks into the wolf and he can't get away, and the huntsman like uses his skin for something. So it ends dark, but that one kind of just kind of like I don't know, to me that one tracks. Like I feel like I've heard that and that's how the story is told. Does that seem right to you? Like even in
Yeah,
the
just
tone,
not the last part.
the
Like,
killing the wolf.
her getting eaten? Does she
So no,
typically
yeah,
get eaten?
typically
Yeah,
they're like running. It's like I'm thinking of like cartoons and stuff. Like
yeah,
she's running and running, running. They never really get the wolf. But no, in this one, the wolf does eat them both.
yeah.
I always thought like the grandma was hiding somewhere. He like put her somewhere in a closet or
No,
something.
I don't know what I thought actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one and it's interesting too because like sometimes it's you've known these stories for so long, but then you think back and you're like when I learn something new, I'm like, wait, how did I originally remember this? Sometimes I can't even remember what
Hmm.
my original thought of it was.
You
Because
know
when
what's
you're
so
saying that, I'm
funny?
like, I don't know.
It's so funny that you say that because I was once told by a teacher that, in your biology class or in your all these classes, you're not gonna like remember all those little facts and details, but you will remember the teachers who told you a story about something. For
Interesting.
whatever reason, you'll
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
the story, but you won't remember the details. But the story,
yeah,
right? And it's
yeah.
not even so much it's the way it made you feel. It's just interesting. We are designed to learn through story.
And I think also just like that, seeing something in so many different ways and so many different versions of something and adaptations or like loosely based versions of it and think or references to it, you almost start to like confuse all of it. Because I'll
I
be
get
honest
it.
with you, when I think about Red Riding Hood, I think of like I in my head I can immediately pull up like a cartoon version of it in my head, but then I also think of the movie Trick or Treat.
Interesting.
And there's a whole scene where she's like Anna Paquin is dressed as Little Red Riding Hood.
Yep.
Nothing to do with the actual fairy tale of Little Red Riding Hood, but for some reason I keep bring that keeps coming up in my head, and just different versions of Red Riding Hood that I've seen over the years.
Honestly, Dave, the way you're talking about it, it's almost making me maybe because my head's still in last week a little bit, but it's like these stories are like archetypes for human behavioral situations, and
Yeah,
maybe that's why we see them over and over again.
yeah,
It's
well,
like you
yeah,
you
and
remember
it's
pieces of the
familiar,
story.
so I think people love to use something familiar and put their own spin on it because it
Hmm.
we have an idea of
Framework.
how it's supposed to go, and then when they do their own spin, we're like, oh, that's different, and
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
we
But I
forgot.
recognize it
Mhm.
somehow.
Catches our attention for sure. Speaking of familiar,
Hmm.
Snow White, and I haven't seen the newest Snow White, and I know there's probably a ton of people saying good, you shouldn't watch it, and I will watch it when I get the opportunity, but I don't know how that kind of holds up to the Grimm version, but there I did recently rewatch the old Disney version, which is
Okay.
a classic.
Yeah.
And the Grimm version differs in a number of ways. So the one of the first ways is rather than the queen asking for the huntsman to kill Snow White, she doesn't just ask for the heart; she wants Snow White's lungs and liver. So that's an interesting little thing right there. Um, oh, so one of the hunters brings boar's insides to her. So like the guts of a boar, and she boils them and eats them, thinking that they're Snow White's insides, which is pretty dark as well.
Uh-huh.
It takes 3 attempts to kill Snow White. Each time the Wicked Queen uses the same disguise, so Snow White is must not catch on.
She's like a
And
Tupac of
yeah, this
very well.
different versions. A prince doesn't come and kiss her. A prince comes at the end. He thinks that the body is beautiful, so he wants it. So he thinks she's dead, and he's going to keep her body
Wow,
because
like a Carl
she
Tanzler like necrophilia job.
yeah, that's kind of dark and crazy actually. Um, the servant drops the coffin, and a piece of the poison apple dislodges from Snow White's throat, and she's brought back to life.
Not True Love's Kiss?
No, and the Wicked Queen doesn't get chased off of a cliff. She's actually invited to Snow White's wedding, and when she gets there, she is forced to wear a pair of red hot iron shoes. She is forced to dance in these until she drops dead.
Yeah, I read that too, actually. And how do you,
And
my
then
question was this, how do
this
you die from that?
and then the dwarfs eat her
What?
body for Thanksgiving feast. And then they
That's
all
like that
kiss
movie
each
Freak
other.
Show.
And then they all kiss each other.
What?
No, those last two things were not true.
They
It
all
wasn't
start
that
kissing on
grim.
each other. I was like, dude,
They don't
I
actually eat
I
her
could
body.
I was gonna
Everything up until
critique
that.
the like sanitizing these tales, but then I was like, well, this one needed to be cleaned up a little bit. But that's actually kind of funny. Yeah, no, but listen though, that's the
She
dancing
drops
with the
dead?
shoes.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, do you just like melt into them? Like, is that how you die from it, or is it just like blood loss?
She's yeah, probably blood loss. Like she's probably in so much pain that she's like passing out
Hmm.
constantly.
Yeah, wow, that's dark. That's a scary one. And Snow White, I think that was like the first full length
It was.
animated film, which is
Yes.
a big deal. And it does kind of hold up, and the Gremlins really got a kick out of it too. Remember that? So, all right. Anyways, so Hansel and Gretel, one of my favorite. You know what this is reminding me of a little bit too? I don't know if you were aware of this, talking about terrifying. Um, what was it? Fairy Tale Theater. Shelley Duvall's
Oh, I recently saw
very
something about that after she passed. Someone had
wow.
shared
That
that. I don't know
was
if I ever watched it.
Robin Williams, Frog Prince. Pee-wee was Pinocchio. There's just a wild ride. That's
Hmm.
that unintentional horror for sure. If anyone wants to have a little bit of fun with that. I mean, I used to watch those when I was a kid, and I was like, this is bananas. And one of them was Hansel and Gretel, and it scared me a lot. But again, like in your what like so the mom we the stepmoms get a lot of bad press in these fairy tales, and there's a reason for that. Probably it has a lot to do with like mother's mortality rate. So moms are dying a lot, having children in childbirth. And, so there needs to be kind of cautionary tales about picking the right one, right?
Well,
So
also, like, were they behaving terribly as well? So they were kind of like used at the like, where does this
so Hansel,
stereotype
the
come from?
original, before even Grimm was just like a mom, not a stepmom, just wanted just they were eating too much and it was too much of a hassle and she wanted to abandon them in the woods. And it kind of, holds true with the Grimm tale where it's a mom, the biological mom, and then it morphs into the stepmom as time goes on. Even within Grimm, because with Grimm they had 17 variations. They cleaned their stuff up too. But we'll talk about that. So in the Grimm Hansel and Gretel, they were eating too much and the mom wanted the to get rid of them. She just didn't want them around. They were just causing a hassle. They weren't allowing for time with like, to spend with the husband. And you get this tale where it's like they're left out in the snow, they do the breadcrumb thing and everything like that. But it's funny because they there's no like when the newer versions it's like the witch and the candy and all these things and I love all that because that's like where you find some real messages and that's like a highlight for it. But the original tale, like the first time it's written, it's really just short and easy, and it's just a tale about overindulgence or you'll get abandoned out in the woods. But I do like the idea of like there being this, they're trying to get the value of don't take more than what you need. Also, like when you do eventually have like the witch's house and it's filled with candy and they're trying to fatten them up.
Mm,
You remember that?
yep.
It's like, do not seek the immediate gratification. Hold on and kind of do what you think is right. Like it's not right to just eat candy, eat candy, eat candy. So try to do what is right versus what feels good in the moment. I like that message, but there's a lot of these have to do with you know, mothers kind of failing their children. And what do you think that's about?
That's what I'm wondering. Like, was this something that was an issue at the time of these
Culturally, it
stories?
had to be at some point.
Which is so opposite of what my thought process would be for mothers at this time. Like we think
Yeah,
about mothers in today's society, and I feel like we probably have a lot of individuals that we know that struggle to be the parent they want to be. And it's interesting to think about, did this exist way back in the 1800s, the 1700s? Did some of the same stressors, concerns around parenthood
I guess
exist?
it
But
seems like it.
it seems like it would, which is bizarre to think about, because I would think just surviving would be hard
Yeah.
enough,
But maybe that's part of what we're talking about here. It's like,
yeah.
so maybe it's like surviving is the ultimate driver, and these stories are trying to say like, look, you have children, that's going to be your priority, and that's like trying to like ingrain that in the culture. And it doesn't mean like it's a huge problem, but I do think that it makes sense that how it turns into a stepmother thing, because probably that is true that a lot of like mothers were dying, and it's like, don't be one of these people. Like, take this role seriously, or it can play
Mm.
have some really serious implications
And
for
it
you.
probably just becomes an easy like kind of theme to play on too, because you never know, like as a kid thinking about, well, who's this person that's going to take the spot of my beloved mother,
Hmm.
right? So it's like and that's like a probably a universal concern that a kid would have, right? Is like,
Yeah.
who is this person really? Like they got my obviously they've won the heart of my father, but are they going to treat me differently because I'm not their child?
What an interesting perspective to kind of look at it from the point of view of children too, because it's like, hey, children, look out. Make sure you're being treated well by this woman too. Like,
Sure.
make sure that that's, something that you're going to be careful of too. I don't know. That's interesting. And one thing about your tale, when you're talking about Snow White, it's like that poison apple that develops over time. Do you think that like kind of got wrapped up into urban legend as time went on, as far as like the razor blade in the apple, like the poisoning of an apple? I don't know. It's like thinking about that.
Hmm.
Like, is that story kind of just that's the progression of the story? Like that idea of the, oh my God, like
Giving
an
an
idea
apple.
of an apple is like such a pivotal societal, like good versus evil moment. I mean, going back to like Genesis, Adam and Eve, right? It's
Right.
like the
You give
symbol.
an apple. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
it's very interesting. Um, yeah, why don't you talk a little about Sleeping Beauty? Because I never even, I'm gonna be honest, I've never even seen the Disney Sleeping Beauty.
I kind of forgot about Sleeping Beauty completely until recently when I was just scrolling through Disney Plus and I saw it and I was like, Sleeping Beauty. I never think of that Disney princess.
Mm-mm.
Like when you think about all the Disney movies, and obviously there's been a ton recently that have kind of come out, and I was like thinking about some of the old school ones. I was like, Sleeping Beauty. I don't remember that story really.
Mm-mm.
Um, but all right, so the Disney version, her name is Aurora,
Yeah.
and she's has an arranged marriage to Prince Philip, I believe. And in the Grimm fairy tale, uh, her name is actually Briar Rose, which might be a little foreshadowing, actually. Um, oh well, while she's on a walk, the queen saves a little fish who got stuck out of the water. The fish thanks her by telling her that she will finally bear a child. And then I guess that child is the princess. There is no arranged marriage for her, though, in the Grimm fairy tale. So that's interesting. I wonder why that was added to the Disney version.
Mm.
Just something they felt was a needed addition,
Yeah,
an
probably.
arranged marriage. What story is not complete without an arranged marriage, really? And fairies that exist in a lot of these stories actually refer to wise women, and there were 13 wise women in the Grimm story in this kingdom, and they were supposed to be invited to a dinner party, but the king and queen only invited or had 12 golden dishes prepared. So the 13th wise woman was offended that she wasn't served her meal in a golden dish as well, and so they didn't invite her at all. And then she ends up putting a curse on the princess, proclaiming that she will die at the age of 15 by pricking her finger on a spindle of spinning wheel. The 12th wise woman still needed to give a gift to the princess, so she lessened the curse. What a nice lady.
That's right.
And promised that she would not die, but end up sleeping for 100 years. The princess never hides with any of the wise women in the forest. She stays with her royal parents the whole time. And on her 15th birthday, she ends up pricking her finger. The prince comes across the castle, and its inhabitants are on the 100th year, which is how he is able to get into the castle. And the prince and the 13th wise woman never fight. In fact, the 13th fairy isn't mentioned in the story at all after the curse is laid. And the kiss isn't what wakes up Briar Rose. It is actually just a coincidence because the curse is expired.
That's interesting. And I'll tell you what else is interesting. The number 13 being
Yeah,
unlucky,
unlucky. Yep. Yep.
and it seems a little almost borrowed from the biblical thing where there's like 12 like apostles, and the 13th one was being
And they're
being
at a dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, that's kind of
And a
ridiculous.
second story where it has nothing to do with the kiss, kind of saving the day from this princess. So Disney's definitely like fixated on this idea of a prince giving a kiss and the princess kind of like having love.
Because that's what we use these stories to perpetuate the culture that we want.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's interesting.
And
Um,
it's missing a big part of it that's missing is the whole Maleficent
yeah,
edition that's in the Disney story and, you know, kind of that whole angle. And obviously, Maleficent is a wonderful Disney villain who, you know, was a great addition to the story. But their story is kind of, you know, interesting as well, I guess. I don't
yeah.
know if it's as interesting without
Well, that's the
Maleficent.
thing. Like they didn't need to be as interesting back then. Like when we remember when we went to like the original horror movies and we're looking at like Frankenstein and stuff, and it's like this doesn't feel as like wow, like in your face and good, but it's like it's the archetype, it's the framework, like it's important. Even though it might not hold the attention, like our
Sure.
attentions, we need more to hold our attention these days, for better or for worse.
This is how little I remembered this one. Actually, when the Maleficent movies came out, I didn't know what story she was from.
Me neither. I
And
was
then
like,
I
Maleficent's
was,
kind of
yeah,
hot.
yeah, I was told, and I was like, I don't remember that at all. So yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story that feels like we both forgot about.
Yeah, no, and just a quick mention of Rapunzel too, because there's some Disney really cleaned that up big time because Rapunzel actually gets pregnant, which
Oh,
is
that's why she's locked in the tower.
yeah, and she gets her hair cut, and when the guy find the witch catches the guy, she knocks him out of the window, and he lands on a prickle bush with on his eyes and goes blind. A lot of blinding,
Yeah,
right? So the Disney left out like the teen mom stuff and and the blindness, and that kind of is a great segue to like these kind of questions. So I mentioned that Grimm was guilty of this, sanitizing all these stories because there was 17 revisions. But like, why soften the stories? Like, if we're trying to give like a view of the world with consequences so that we're better able to cope, right? And like we do this over and over and over again with these stories in our culture until the point they're unrecognizable. And what's scary about that is like when the story is unrecognizable, the point being made is unrecognizable. So like by cleaning up these stories, to me, it's like we miss the point. And the point is to hold on to the wisdom of the past, right? So what do you think about should we be cleaning up these stories or should we be telling the same old stories over and like what is it? And then some people say there's only so many stories to tell. I don't know. What do you think?
yeah. Well, I mean, that's definitely something that can probably be true. The other part of it is when we say clean up, I wonder it'd be really interesting to know why certain thing choices are made. Like why certain things are considered to be like, oh, maybe that's too far. We got to like add this
Yeah.
spin to it. But sometimes like, some additions are made and obviously that's to kind of like pick up the story. And is it more that like some of these things just didn't really fit tone wise? Like things felt too harsh and they were like, that's not going to really fit with our storyline here. Or was it like, no, that's inappropriate or that's like offensive or that's going to shock kids too much? And like we as a culture have grown, so now we don't feel like that is
Mm.
appropriate for our culture. It would be really interesting to know because I think there's something to be said about all that. And even in today's society, there's examples I could give of movies that get remade or stories that get adapted in today, and they're so much tamer than they were. Like, let's say a movie that was made in the 80s, right?
Yeah. Like, are you thinking of an example?
Yeah, well, actually, one just came up, and all right, so this is a ridiculous example, but the Toxic Avenger is an '80s like really raunchy horror comedy, I guess you would say, and it just got a remake that everybody was like, "There's no way you could make that in today's society," which so I haven't. It hasn't come out yet. It's coming out in August. It actually wasn't going to get released at all because they felt like it might have gone too far. Which I
Yeah.
will look forward to see what that means. But like even that question of like how can you make that in today's society? I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. When they made these things, some of these additions, some of these like really dark things that we're pointing out might have felt like how do we put that in a movie today?
Yeah, it almost feels like the wisdom of the past was to expose kids to the dangers of the world. And our instinct now is to protect them from the dangers of the world.
And when you
But
say now, we're talking about within the last 150 years.
yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So like, and I think like, you know, paradoxically, were isn't that what they were doing? Like by exposing them to the dangers of the world, isn't that what you're doing? Aren't you
Oh,
protecting them from the
oh,
dangers of the world?
but actually, wait a minute.
Okay, hold up.
One factor that could probably have a pretty big impact here. Kids, when these stories were being told, kids may have already been exposed to conditions that created situations maybe even more shocking than a man's eyes getting pricked out by a pricker bush. That
That's
might have been
happily ever after.
tame.
That's the end. Yeah,
That might have been tame compared to some of the things that kids saw.
that's
If
true.
we're talking about early 1800s or prior, you know, people might have been exposed to conditions that created situations where they watched death and traumatic things on a regular basis, and they were maybe more hardened, more used to seeing
It's a
things,
good
and
point.
maybe they had to throw in more shocking things because of how much they were exposed to in real life. I
Well,
don't
let me
know.
ask you this. Like, you're a horror guy,
Yeah.
and you know, I played GoldenEye as a kid, and maybe a little Doom. I don't know. Do you think that exposing kids to like, just video games, like violent video games, will make them violent?
Yes.
Okay. Please elaborate.
I'm actually a pretty big proponent on the fact that like some of the video games and the amount of exposure that kids have to these like super violent games and the amount of time I think they play them as well, I do think it can impact a person's mindset.
You know, it's interesting that you say that because like I'm actually thinking as you say that maybe the point of the story is also, and I think the reason why you're saying that like it's like so say GTA or whatever it is, right? I
Yeah.
don't play the
Like
game.
Call of Duty would be one that's like super violent that I've, talked to kids about. And
Yeah,
it tends to come out a little bit in personality almost.
really.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was thinking like my critique would have been, all right, so there's a maybe a prostitute or something in GTA and you like just like slap her or kill her or whatever like that. And there's like, no one's monitoring like the emotional reaction. And I
Right.
think like when you're
Right.
sitting around the table telling a story with like your family, like and you're like, and then she fell out of the roof and they cut her hair and the eyes were poked out or whatever it is. And like you can see like are you seeing a visceral reaction? Are you seeing maybe it's a way to like check like their emotional barometer? Like is it are their emotions
Yeah.
responding appropriately to like different sort of
And
stimuli?
and what's involved in this scenario that you're giving
Yeah.
as they're being told the story? What's involved there that's missing when a kid's playing video games?
The support and the guide.
There's a freaking parent or some
Yeah.
person telling them the story
Right.
so they're open to be able to have a conversation to process what they just learned.
So the reason why the video games and like are a problem is because they're engaging in that on their own without any
Yeah.
oversight and
The only other
insight.
person they're talking to is
The
that group
40-year-old
of
pedophile?
yeah, the group of kids or
What?
yeah, 40-year-olds on their headset that are saying the most violent and horrible things you've ever heard. If you want
Yeah.
to hear some terrible language, hop on your kids video game headset and you will hear the worst stuff you've
I
ever heard.
know.
It's
Look, I
insane.
know. I've
It's
stumbled
literally
upon
insane.
that. I stumbled upon that in my own world.
Yeah.
They've got the headphones. Go team, go! Or like, they think they're Navy
Oh,
SEALs.
it's
Um,
horrible the things I hear. Like, yeah, it's pretty bad.
the bullying on there for
Hate
sure.
speech, just random use of words out of context that really don't make sense, but they just like to say really horrible things. It's crazy. But
Okay.
back to what we were talking
Yeah, yeah,
about,
yeah.
I think that there's so many factors that kind of play into why we clean things up. And like I guess what I'm saying is by the time Disney made Snow White in what, 1920 something, 1923, was that what it
I'm
was?
not sure.
It was in 1920s, I think. And because yeah, didn't it just get its like anniversary recently?
Dave, I
Okay.
don't follow. Okay, but
All right. All right. Anyways, when it made let's say Snow White, there might have been things that felt like in society in that time, like this is something that would shock them, because as time goes on, our comforts expose us to less traumatic experiences, I guess. So kind of
Yeah.
like back to what I was saying, like when, in the 1800s or prior, people might have been exposed to more horrendous things. So some of these things might not have felt so bad at the time. So
Okay. And so they kind of had something to kind of measure it against too, which makes sense because like these kids that are in like these war games have no idea what like these true traumas are. So it's
yeah,
like it's like they have no empathy. There's no gravity or no reverence for like what this stuff is. And that's interesting too. That's something that's missing. Um, and it's funny that you bring up my next question in a way is like, should the audience have the ability to change the tale? And whether or not they should, they have over, you know, and sometimes it's
absolutely.
like when culture is going the wrong way or there's a lot of critique on culture, that might have a group of people or a culture start to reject a story. And I think that's like when you brought up Snow White, it made me think about that because the new one we were actually going to put on the other night and I didn't. And the reason why I didn't was it had like 1.4 stars or something.
Yeah, it had terrible ratings for numerous reasons.
So it's
And
like,
actually, the reasons that I originally heard that people were trashing it are not the reasons that I'm currently here. People are trashing it, which I think is kind of interesting. So people's hate for the movie shifted over a very quick period of time. And yeah,
what is it? What are some of the
well,
things that
first I heard it was the actress that they picked for Snow White. People were upset that they didn't pick someone white,
okay.
German. I guess
Yeah.
it's a German
It's a
tale.
German
So
tale. Yep.
so they expected a specific cultural background. So
Okay.
there was hate towards that. Then there was some things that this actress presented, personal life wise, I think, like just her personality was getting
Okay.
attacked a lot, or some
Okay.
statements she made. I don't know the actress at all.
Okay.
Kind
I
of like
don't
one
even
of
know her
those
name. Yeah.
kind of one of those things where it feels like everybody knows this actress or actor that feels brand new to me, and it's like, where was I? Why does everyone know who this is?
Dude, we're getting old. That's
Yeah,
why.
exactly. They were probably on
Like
some Disney show.
the only way I'll recognize this actress if she's dressed like Snow White. That's
Right.
the only way I can recognize her.
So that was bizarre to me. And then it shifted to, actually, Gal Gadot has been getting all the hate from what I understand, and
She's in that
people
too?
are, yep, she plays the evil queen.
Yeah, maybe I'll give it a chance. I don't know.
That's what I said. And then I hear people, if you look at the reviews on Letterboxd, if anybody uses that, everybody's trashing her acting in the movie.
So it just might the movie might just
But I
stink.
think people don't like her anymore.
Okay. Did
For
she get up to something?
Yep, I guess she got into that. She was just, there's some political
Oh,
stuff
and
that she,
this folks is why we don't get political.
yes, that she expressed views. I can't remember. Don't want to say them because I can't remember which side she's on, so I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, she has some
This
views.
is so
So,
so yeah, and then I guess people didn't like the musical numbers, and there's a lot of music, I understand. So that's
uh
another thing that, which would get me too.
yeah, that would throw me too.
Yeah,
Too
but
much
I
music
haven't
would
seen
throw
it
me
to be
too.
able to
Yeah.
critique it.
But what about that question, Dave? Do you think that I mean, it's a
Should
tough
the
question.
audience be able to
Yeah, have the
change?
ability to change
Don't
the
they?
okay.
Isn't that kind of every adaptation? Isn't that what's happening? And
So like
I guess like with this, I'm kind of like, are people that hard up that they can't accept that someone's going to have a new take on it? Does a story have to stay within certain parameters in order for it to be an accepted adaptation? Like, does it have to be German?
I think it has to, no, I don't think so, but I think it has to convey the same lesson. Is that what's happening? Does it have to?
That's a great point, and I do think
Yeah.
that from what I understood, some of the actresses had said like, "Oh, well, this story is more going to be more geared about this,"
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I don't
Okay.
know.
Well, then that might be the problem, right?
That
Because
could
it, like
definitely be an issue.
you're coming away from this is the archetype of watch out for my, there's like a beauty involved, right? Like there's a danger of beauty, there's a danger of like jealousy. Like
Well,
people,
we also have the beloved Disney version having that whole storyline about like a princess needing to be saved by a prince, right?
Hmm.
And in today's society, that storyline might not fit every story anymore, right?
Yeah,
And
that's
that's a
true.
tough pill for some people to swallow.
And especially a prince like myself. No, no damsel in distress. Damn.
But
Tough.
is that an old fashioned trope
Mhm.
that people need to accept might not be the storyline that every new adaptation is going to capture?
Yeah, I think so. I think in some ways, I think like it's about some people want to accept that trope, and I think that's great. And I think that's good. And some people don't. And I think that's good, and I think that's great.
Right.
And so like I don't know, maybe we can create some news stories too,
Well,
right?
you know, you're bringing up something that I think we can talk about, even though it's a little controversial.
Okay.
But the whole Disney, like going to live action adaptations and almost specifically choosing actors, it feels like, that are culturally different than the original sources,
Yeah.
if that makes sense. So, for example, like The Little Mermaid
Yep.
had Haley Berry, is that her name? Was that, I don't know, an African American actress
Yep.
played the Little Mermaid, and at the time that met a lot of, you know, public controversy, and
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
felt divisive, right? Like there were some people who were very strong about that's not what the Little Mermaid was supposed to look like. Is that is that something that is like supposed to stay the same always? Does she always
No,
have
that's
to
not
be
something I
a
don't think I
redheaded
think it
white
could be
girl?
cross cultures but I think like what's maybe some people the more like if people are being I don't know. I think part of it for people was it felt like Disney wasn't trying to create good stories anymore. They were just trying to like almost cross all their T's and dot all their I's and make sure that was taken care of. And like the story was sort of secondary to like a message that like, hey, we're super inclusive. And I think that's where you kind of like lost it a little bit, right?
Right. So, and that's where it's a hard line to balance
Yeah.
too, though, because as a viewer, we have to accept that, like, all right, well, if this is the storyline that they want to show us, then I'm going to have to just trust that they're choosing the best actors or the people they
Hmm.
feel are going to fit these roles or just perform these roles to the best ability they have. However, I think you're right. It felt like to some people
Hmm.
that Disney is just trying to purposely put in different um actors and
Even if it's not going
actresses
to be
in
as
these
good, like
roles.
shoehorn stuff in so that they can say, hey, look, like this is where they are. And I think that's starting to like not, I think that's uncomfortable, starting to be uncomfortable for everybody because it's like, well, look, like let's just make the best art. And I don't think it always has to follow a certain cultural at all. I think if it's good, it'll be good because there's
Yeah,
tons of examples of like, movies that are like people from all one race or culture or whatever that are just good and it's undeniably good. You know what I mean?
sure.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
some
gonna lie, I didn't hate the Little Mermaid live action. It was okay.
no, so but I think they missed the mark on some of the live actions for sure. And like let's take it away from even that like the Lion King was not as good as like the cartoon Lion King
Yeah.
somehow.
But I actually didn't mind the live action. I thought it
I didn't
was
mind.
kind of okay.
Yep,
And then Mufasa was not as good, but still okay. But
that's
you're
still
right. The
okay.
the the cartoon version to me was the best, but that's also because that's the one we know.
The Aladdin movie a
Oh,
live
sick.
action had it not been for the cartoon being so damn good or maybe just nostalgic for
Yeah,
me.
that's what I think. I think for
Yeah.
like someone like you and I who literally were kids going
Yeah.
to see Aladdin, learning every song, The Lion King, just at that prime age where it just connected with
Mhm.
us. For us, it's hard. And that I think that's what a lot of that pushback was for these new because if you look, a lot of people complaining are unfortunately they're like our age. And it was so funny. I saw this video online of some guy ranting about the Snow White movie, and then in the comments, someone goes, dude, you're like 40. Why are you watching? This isn't even for you. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, that is a great point right there.
Yeah.
Let the
Yeah.
kids get their moment with these stories, connect with it. And if they don't like it, then that says something. You know what I
No,
mean?
it's funny though because you're right, and they're connecting with people on different times. Like there's a lot of people now walking around who Jim Carrey is the old original Grinch.
Yes. Yeah, I know.
And
And I'm
it's like,
like,
okay, that's not my Grinch. But I
right.
love the Jim Carrey Grinch too. It's like at that sort of that,
Yeah. But
and then there's
imagine
a
if
new
like
newer.
when the Lion King or Aladdin came out, when the cartoon version, imagine if like our parents were up in arms. That's not the Lion King. I'd
Yeah,
be like,
yeah,
what are you
yeah,
doing?
yeah.
Right?
I know it's
That'd be
very
weird.
interesting.
Is it
No, it's
is it
true.
just society today where like people are, remember when we were doing the nostalgia episode? Are people today just so wrapped up in nostalgia that they can't accept new things, and it's like they feel this overprotection of things that remind
Mhm.
them of their youth? Like, because that doesn't even feel like that would have been something that would have happened in the early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
there
I
was
don't.
the 90s was a time we were it's a weird time, and I don't want to be, maybe we're just being nostalgic, but it just felt like in a very original time.
Sure,
Didn't it?
sure. I
I
mean,
mean,
I guess, but like also, even if it wasn't, I don't think we would have even registered because I
we
don't feel like
were
adults were that into things that were for kids.
that's true.
It didn't feel that way, at least. I think they liked it. Like, I'm sure our parents enjoyed watching Gremlins with us, or,
Yeah.
or ET, but I don't feel like if they didn't like it, they would have been like up in arms making, there was no, obviously no TikTok back then, but
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
their version
We,
of
we
that, like they weren't going to like town meetings and talking about like,
That's a
I
good
can't
point.
stand this.
It's a good point.
Adults today are
You know what I
like,
think, like
we love
the
kids now.
my problem, sorry, like my problem, my issue with like the Disney thing, I was trying to like figure out what it was. And it is that like kind of like what I mentioned, because they're trying to do something, they're putting something above the intention of the story. They're putting something above the values that are being supposed to be, conveyed through the story. And I think that's where they messed up. It didn't matter, like it wouldn't matter who they used to fill these roles, as long as like the intention was, first, let's tell the story. First, let's get the best people to tell this, to get this value across, because that's what the story is supposed to do. I
In
think,
some ways, though, maybe like not making excuses, but maybe they do think they're getting the best people because it's not like they're getting no name actors and actresses. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like Gal Gadot is not a no name.
that's true.
The
That's a
girl
good
they have
point.
playing her, Snow White, is not a no name. We just don't know her. Like she's popular with kids, or I guess, I think. I don't know. Um, so maybe are we just, I don't know. And all right, so I guess this is a question, kind of like kind of putting it back on you. If
Yeah.
they do decide to have new messages, is it okay for them to use these stories? Because I mean, Disney kind of did it with Grimm
Good question.
originally,
Yeah, because Grimm did it too.
right?
Like Grimm did it. They cleaned up stories,
Mm.
and
And I'm sure
um,
the takeaway, like the final messages, are different then.
I think as long as the message is quote unquote good, and maybe with the idea of good, is that something that is, transcendent of time? I mean, that's hard to know. Not really. I mean, yeah,
So,
I don't
so
know. It's hard
I
to question that.
guess if I were to make a guess, I would say probably, from my understanding, the Snow White of today is more about being a strong female,
Uh-huh.
empowering females, right?
Mhm.
Whereas the Snow White of the 1920s of Disney, she was very sweet. She
Value system.
cleaned. She had a lot of like gender specific roles in the
Mhm.
film, and then she was saved by a prince, right? Doesn't scream female empowerment,
No.
but there's
And
she's a very good person overall.
right, right. No, so it's interesting. So they do track with the values of the culture changing. Like
Sure.
you see the values of the culture changing first through the stories.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. I think that's kind of awesome actually. So, I mean, I don't know. Like we're getting older, so maybe the stories don't like maybe they identify more with the younger people, of course, because that's essentially who these stories are for. They're not for us anymore.
Right. That line right there.
Yeah.
So this is actually a thing that I talk about on my horror podcast too all the time. Because as a person in my 40s, the
Yeah.
horror that I knew, and obviously that's another genre where things get remade, and we have old stories becoming new. I have to sit back and know that there might be a new film coming out that is a character that I used to know and love, but They're making it for that younger generation.
Yep.
And I could sit here and be bitter and angry that like that's not, that's not
Yeah.
my Leatherface or something like
Yeah.
that.
No, I no,
But
yeah.
it's not for me necessarily. But
That's a
like the Scream series, for example, they made that on MTV. That wasn't for the 40-year-old like Scream fan that grew up watching the first 1 through 4. It was for a teen audience, an older teen audience that was going to like embrace this character and have their own version of it. And then,
so what keeps the stories alive then
in
is
a
their
way,
ability to change.
yes. So they have to change to some extent because what we connected with isn't
Yeah.
always going to connect. Like, how many times have you probably shared a film or a story with your kids and it just didn't hit for them the way it hit for you?
Heartbreaking. Never
It's the
ending story.
worst, right?
Yeah. The Goonies.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
They
Yeah,
need
no,
their
right.
new versions of
What an
things.
interesting sort of way to kind of like wrap that up. Like you're right. Like it's interesting that you can clearly have had that moment too where you're like, but that moment I'm having now where it's like, oh, like that's just not for us anymore. We're
Yeah.
like, that's sad.
We're ancient.
And for them to for the stories to survive and to thrive and to, the newer generations have to identify with them and they can't identify with them if we identify with them.
That's the
It's
other thing. You're exactly right. Like that's almost going to make them not want to identify with
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah, that's
because
interesting.
anything that we like is not cool
And you know
until they tell us it's cool.
what's cool about that, Dave, is like as culture shifts, and it kind of is on this pendulum where like even if we want to think about it in terms of like conservative and liberal and like progressive versus conservative, where conservative just in terms of not politically, but like where, the old ways are better and progressive is like we need to do things differently. Like that's a constant shift in culture in all cultures. And these stories will track and follow and grow and change and live forever. And that's pretty cool.
We hope at least.
We hope at
That's
least. Yeah.
that's the goal for these stories. So
So these stories are like the archetype for our culture. Like you hear these stories and you understand what's important to the people.
yeah,
And that makes sense because of the at the time of the Snow White thing coming out, those were things that were like really seemingly important to a lot of people, right?
right.
So that makes sense.
So just not to keep harping on Disney,
Yeah.
but as you were just talking, I was like, well, what about some of these newer stories? Like, what I wonder. So, like, all right, so like Encanto, or like
Dude,
Coco,
now you're
right?
now you're speaking my language. That's the two bangers right there.
Yeah,
And Moana.
and all right, Moana, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
great. Those are three like newer Disney
Mhm.
stories, right? And they don't have that old tie-in, I would assume, but I'm sure they have like some. They're like
They've got a
taken.
past, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder where those come from. But I also like think about those. Like those are stories that you hear both kids and parents being able to connect with at the same time.
Hmm. Wow.
So it's interesting. Like those didn't come out and you get all this like angry backlash about them
Yeah.
coming out. It's just no, they were kind of just accepted along with from
Well,
multiple.
is a hero's journey,
Yep.
but we're taking the female perspective, which is awesome. I love Moana. It's probably one of my favorites. Encanto is all about family values
Yeah.
and like, and that's like a beautiful thing. And then Coco is also about like giving reverence for like the family and the one people that have passed and like remembering.
Oh, and then there's
Like,
Frozen, obviously, too,
and
which
Frozen. Frozen
huge.
Frozen is actually tied up in Grimm somewhere.
Oh, okay. It
Yeah.
is.
Yes, it is. For sure. So
Interesting.
Frozen, yeah, Frozen has a history with Grimm, which is cool. But good, great.
See, that's
It's all that.
where I think Disney was going in the right direction. I love the idea of having these different stories in different cultures, the
Hmm.
way they were presenting them with these different cartoons, rather than trying to force it all this different cultural stuff
Dude, that's exactly it. Yes.
into a film that just like maybe it didn't make sense for, or maybe
Right.
it
Oh
felt
yes.
too
That's
forced.
dude, that's it. It is that because it feels forced because it's like you throw me in Encanto and I'm like, oh, I love this culture. Like what you know what I mean? Like you know what I mean?
Oh
Like
my god, that would be the best if they made a live action version of Encanto and you were thrown into there in
right.
the
People would be
cast.
like, why is there a
But we don't
Man with
talk
a
about
mustache.
Grego.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They would. Yeah, the
That
reviews.
would be
You want to think Snow White
amazing.
did bad? You throw me in live action Encanto? Forget it.
Oh my God. Can we please make that happen though, Disney?
Yeah, and I'm
I've never
Maribel.
wanted something
It's
more.
like, like, why is he Maribel? I feel left out.
Oh boy.
But it's awesome. That's an awesome sort of way to like kind of understand that. Yeah, that's instead of forcing it, it's just like let's be authentic. Like
Yeah.
let's see like the authenticity of it.
I,
And
I always thought that was cool. And I always thought that they should continue to try to expand on that and just keep looking at different cultures and
mhm.
creating stories to highlight the different cultures. Like you got Mulan, you got um
That's great too.
right was it Raya the I forget what that one. I didn't
I
actually
actually
watch
really
that
like
one.
that
I
too.
didn't watch that one.
There was one where there's like out in space. Man,
Wally?
oh no, and there was one where they're like the maybe like a dad died, and like they had to like it was like a fairy tale land, and they had to go like go on some adventure. It was actually
Oh,
really good.
interesting.
It came out during it was gonna go and be in the theaters, but then COVID happened, and it
Oh, was
like
that
kind
the
of
one? Wait, was it like Strange something?
yes. Oh
And
no,
they,
that was a little bit later.
do you know what that
I
one
saw that one
is?
too.
I was told I look like the main character from that.
I think I could see that. Yeah.
I'll, no, someone said that to me, and then I looked it up, and I was like, "Oh my god, that looks exactly like me," and I don't know if I like that or not.
Yeah.
He does have a huge schnoz though, so I didn't like that.
Well, you don't have a Schnee Don't think that way. Um, important, right? The
Yeah.
stories like I guess these they serve as a moral compass, and I think that's cool. The Grimm thing, very cool. Collecting stories, it's a weird thing to collect, if I think that's cool.
It's a weird thing to collect. Where
But
do you
someone's got
keep
to do
them?
it.
Right up here.
Yeah, someone's got to do it. And I like what a fun thing to be like a folklorist. Oh, one last question here. Um, do they have to be rural? Because like it seems like all the fairy tales are rural, and if they're not rural, are they urban legend?
Yeah, I guess they have a different twist if they're not rural, huh?
Yeah, so like an urban legend, you know what's funny is like fairy tales have to have a happy ending. Urban legends have to not.
Right, right.
I
Yeah, I'm
think
trying
that's
to. I'm like going in my head thinking about fairy tales that aren't rural. I mean, you said never ending story.
is that a fairy tale though?
Is it a fairy tale?
I
I
feel
don't
like it's
know.
still rural.
But he's no, he lives in like a city.
He's sort of suburban, I guess.
He
Maybe.
runs into like it feels like he's running into like a main on the main
Yeah,
street
that's true.
into
That's
like
true.
the
The
bookshop.
dumpster. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of city-ish, but then
Yeah.
you got to get taken out of the city in order for the story to exist.
Because the
Big
story
is
exists
big a
in the
fairy tale?
rural where it exists. What's that?
Is big a fairy tale?
Mm,
Am I
big?
stretching the
Yeah,
term fairy tale too
I
far?
think you are. Because I think
Okay.
it's gonna be short and concise and have a happy ending.
Like a kid gets big and then he gets kid
And
again.
small again. And he has like a weird like sexual relationship with an adult who like at the end of the movie is kind of like, well, in a few years maybe. It's like, what?
Yeah, I'll see in a few years.
Wait, what? Not good. Good movie though.
And like, didn't every kid? Did you? I don't know about you. Did every kid fall in love with her as well?
Yeah,
It's
I know
like,
I did.
whoa, this like attractive older woman is like into a guy that's a kid. That could
That
be
when a
me.
kid that's like 13, 12 years old.
that could totally be
Yeah, it's
me.
like a dream come true. Yeah, and having an apartment with like a trampoline inside. All right, now we've gone off the rails. And we've lost our younger viewers by talking
Sorry
about
about
Big,
that.
the
Yeah,
dance in
all
the
of our
day.
younger viewers.
Yeah, do we have that? I think we
Uh,
do. I think we do.
yeah.
If you're young and you haven't seen the movie Big with Tom Hanks, do yourself a favor. How about that?
Um, Message us somewhere if you're young and you think you might be our youngest listener or viewer. I really want to know what age range we got here.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too, actually.
Our young,
College.
our youngest. Yeah, I know we have some college kids,
Yeah,
but a lot of
nothing.
grad school college
A lot
kids.
of
So I
grad
don't know.
school. Yeah, but that could be any age, really. Never too late,
Never too late.
right?
Yep. Don't judge it. Don't judge those older grads.
Yeah, we were a couple of oldies.
We were 50s when we were in grad school. It was
No,
awesome.
please.
Remember that?
We're still very far away from that ripe old age.
Yeah.
Ugh, I don't want to think about that. Well,
Well,
Dave, what did you think? Like, yeah, I mean, what did you think about Grimm?
it's very interesting and kind of a cool thing to talk about. And I think also, like, the last conversation we're having, sort of relevant to a lot of discussion going on today about these like stories getting changed and
Yeah.
adapted. So I think, looking at the original sources, kind of seeing how they even change in the first place when Disney originally made some of these, or,
Hmm.
whatever, is kind of showing like it's okay for stories to change. It's inevitable. They're gonna change. So
Uh-huh.
maybe we need to not be so rigid
Yeah,
about.
embrace that. Let them change so that they can go on, and maybe one day they'll just have that faith that maybe one day they'll
Right.
change back to what you want them to do.
But also to stop thinking like the beloved story that you thought was like the original source. It's not the original source. It's not even the original story. Snow White is not the that from Disney is not the original Snow White. So like all these stories have changed over time. So the story that you are fighting so hard for its purity isn't even pure in the first place.
Is not.
So,
Is not. Where'd you go?
all right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. The spiel.
Ah, we forgot to front load the spiel. I feel like that
Well,
worked.
rate, review, all that great stuff. We did get a. Did we already do our
No, the review.
review?
No.
Okay. So I just wanted to read our review, make sure that we don't forget to give that shout out. So we got our recent one the other day from Mags0904. I it said a grateful therapist and
Hmm.
5 stars. Thank you so much. I absolutely love listening to this podcast. It's nice to get a little little refreshers and different perspectives on therapist related things, but the random topics discussed are equally as entertaining. I am laughing and smiling throughout most of the episodes. Please keep producing episodes. This is the first podcast I've gotten hooked on in quite some time. Also, I never leave reviews, but as a fellow therapist, I know we enjoy the occasional positive feedback. So I thought I would feed your egos a bit. Yeah, that is very accurate. We love the occasional
Need it.
feedback. Can't say enough how much that, you know, just hits the sweet spot right
Yeah, it
there.
helps out a lot.
Everything that was just said in there is just like so amazing to hear. Um, and yeah, we just that's kind of like what we want. We want people to be smiling, we want people to laugh along with us, learn a little bit, relate or find helpful tips and the things that we discuss. Whatever it is, we just hope somebody feels something when they listen. So the fact that you are means everything to us. So thank you so much for leaving that feedback. And yeah, we hope to keep that going for you.
Yeah,
And
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 the Patreon.
Patreon, we got a new we got one new member this past week, so that's awesome, but we want to continue to build. So as I keep telling everyone, we encourage everybody to join the Patreon, join the community. There's ways for us to chat on there with the community discussion boards and things like that. You can be a paid member or you can be a free member, but just be a member so that you can interact with us on there and interact with other listeners and all that good stuff. So we hope to see you on there. That is the only place you will get videos going forward. And we also have episodes available on there that won't be available anymore on our other listening sites. So, yeah, plenty of reason to hop on. Please do. We hope to see you there.
We do. And
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much for listening. We will see you later. Everybody, have a great night. See you.
Yep.